Welcome back to the Winner Circle, everybody. I'm here with Anton from Optro, and they are building kind of that regulatory AI that's good for risk and analysis. And we're going to talk to Anton all about how he built the program. Anton, welcome to the show and congratulations on the award.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So before we get into the deep guts of this, tell us a little bit about Optro and kind of what the company's all about.
Yeah. So Optro. Some of you may know it as AuditBoard. So we changed our name about 2 months ago. But the company is an audit risk and compliance company, or sort of the way we think about it is for enterprises around the world, a risk management platform across various different functions. And so what we try to do, what we are sort of our mission is to help global enterprises turn risk into opportunity, sort of really manage the risk, go from risk mitigation to risk management in a more, increasingly dynamic and regulated world.
Yeah, and it is becoming more regulated, especially with AI. The Europeans are trying to do some regulation there. I know we're fighting it here in the US. But before we get into it, you've built some pretty amazing products. You were at LinkedIn and Workday before. What
Mhm.
kind of drew you into Optro in this very different GRC space?
Yeah, so I've worked at enterprise software my entire career, and the way I describe it is like I've worked for enterprise software in various different functions, either startups and big companies. Companies like Coca-Cola have always been sort of a customer, meaning that like sort of all different types of things that they do, hiring and retaining people, new market entry. That's the kind of stuff that I've always been sort of interested in, which is that's to say like really how the world works behind the scenes. And so when I was looking for sort of my next opportunity prior to Optro, I was looking for really sort of a good management team in a sort of narrow but large enough space that is about to be transformed. Because I saw that I've been at Optro for about 2 years, and what I saw was a world that was about to change with the release of ChatGPT and sort of large language models becoming widespread. And so that's what I saw in sort of Optro and GRC. It was a very strong management team. It was a highly loyal, dedicated, and passionate customer base, which is really what you really need in order to transform, call it like bluntly, like what we're about to enter into is every function in in enterprises is going to transform itself. And people, at work, sort of at their jobs can do what people do. They really have one choice in a changing environment. They can sort of sit back and wait, or jump headfirst and try to ask themselves, hey, what kind of future do I want to live in? And especially sort of recognizing that uh, while the specific aspects of any type of knowledge work may go away, may be automated away in the near future, the knowledge worker will not be. Or rather, that's to say that the knowledge worker that adapts and understands that what they are trying to do for their business and for their customers is actually going to thrive in this next era with additional tools. And so that's what I saw when I came to, what I saw at AuditBoard or Optro, which is a highly motivated and passionate user base that, totally honest, I actually had never seen such passion for a product, for a technology in what has reputationally always been sort of like what people have always said about audit and risk teams as like offices of no, or the ones that bother you to do stuff. Which like no one's gonna lie that's a part of their job that they don't like to do, but it's a necessary part of it. But that said, sort of the passion that they bring to the passion, the intelligence that they bring to their work on a daily basis was something that I found pretty exciting.
Now, you said publicly that your philosophy is to bet on human creativity. So,
Mhm.
in this world where AI companies are kind of working to replace kind of that, not replace, but automate those kind of human tasks, that's a pretty distinct position. Where does that principle come from?
More broadly, outside of pure enterprise software or even Optro, my view on that is that there are those that are going to speak to AGI and ASI and those things, and that's a healthy debate. That's a healthy discussion and a healthy sort of dedication that a lot of people have are putting their minds towards. For me, though, whatever happens, at the end of the day, it's about people and what kind of society we want to live in. So, like, when we think about, say our customers, 75% of what they do in terms of where they spend their time, it will go away. It could even go as high as 80, 85%. But the function around sort of like managing risk, being adaptable, and actually really having goals and values is something that is intrinsically human, right? And so the hot word, maybe not the hot word, but the key word in all of AI and machine learning is alignment. And so it has to align to something. And so I think there's a lot of people who will believe that, hey, um, if you sort of like let Claude or ChatGPT, like just do your work, it will do it, and that's probably true. Except what it can't do is come up with its own values that matter to you. And so that's to say that, like, if a company wants to take more risk, there's judgment calls in evaluating what that might be. Uh, if a company wants to enter a new market, there are judgment calls, investments, trade-offs that really like should be aligned to a business and their identity and what they want to do. And you can change that. And when you change that, sort of people will sort of behave differently. But, I think of like the great business of the world, like say like, Costco. If Costco wanted to go compete with Apple, I'm sure they could, or could try at least, but that's not who they are. And the same reason, sort of when you talk about like great businesses and great brands, it's about their identity and sort of staying to that, and being true to that, and whatever they do, making sure that the people, the culture, the tools, and the services that they leverage align to that. And so that's where, like, within that identity, that's human creativity. That's an area where human creativity can thrive because, as we automate more things, the things that we've already solved for, the things that we've already figured out, they get automated away. AI is so sort of phenomenal at that. But where do we go next? What do we want to be? How do we really think about an action on, let's see, for our customers, risk and aligning those things to the corporate goals and values that's sort of a space for human creativity.
So you guys are already working with like a lot of the Fortune 500, and now you've introduced this, Optro AI. What did a typical day look like for an internal audit team at a large enterprise before you guys kind of rolled out this AI?
Well, typical for an internal audit team, a typical day is pretty straightforward, in the sense that like the bulk of the work is actually spent on coordination and document review. And so you think about like, say, hey, I just need to do sort of an audit of privacy or password policies. And actually whether and the sort of the controls around that and whether they're adhered to within the business. And so what they do is, so what an internal auditor would do is say, okay, here's where I want to focus on this business unit, this product line. And then they go identify the people, they go find the evidence that sort of that's supposed to support that, like, hey, data is encrypted, or password policies are being enforced, and they go get all that and they go review that, sort of they align all the various policies and documents, whatnot. So you can imagine like a very like labor intensive manual process where a person's just staring at a screen saying, hey, this one line over here, does it look like that line over there? Or is there something that off? Is there a period that's off? Is it attached to the wrong, service or business entity or whatnot? And so like, that's where our customers spend 75% of their time. I think, now, I think sort of, I imagine your follow-up question is going to be like, hey, what does it look like now? And so we're in a journey. What it looks like now depends very much on actually the person who wants to use it. Now, what I mean by that is AI is so powerful, like it's clearly so powerful right now that you can actually do so much. But it does actually still require that you set things up appropriately so that it can work consistently, predictably, reliably, repeatably. And the ones that should really, really embrace that like, hey, they try to use it, in a first pass, and it sort of doesn't work quite the way they want it to work. Um, and they spend the time and figuring out, hey, maybe I have to sort of rewrite this description. Maybe I have to sort of sequence it in some specific way. Like they're the ones where so that 75% spent on the particular task may go down by as much as 50 or 60 or 70%. Right. But, going back to sort of your earlier question, what that tells you is that alignment is still everything. And people in general have spent so much time, like people sort of, we in our processes in our day-to-day lives, we learn a lot of things. We distill things from our training, from our experience, from our internal rules when we perform a particular task. At times, it's actually sort of difficult to quickly just sit down and just write down exactly what you want. And that's actually real work to go figure out what all those things are so that someone else can understand. And if a person does that, I think they begin to see pretty magical things even today.
Yeah, and now this risk and compliance space, especially with AI, is getting
Mhm.
complicated. It's a space where the stakes are super high for getting it wrong, right?
Mhm.
You get regulatory penalties, legal
Mhm.
exposure, and
Mhm.
worst is like reputational damage. That raises the bar for AI, I think, significantly.
Mhm.
What does good enough AI look like in that context versus kind of consumer AI?
I think you have to think about it in multiple different types of interfaces. And so, in my personal view, all AI, well, not all AI, but all frontier AI today can deliver value. You think about like sort of the way we think about it at Optro is assistive AI, copilot, and agentic or autonomous agent AI. And so in each of those, we bucket them, we require a certain quality and performance thresholds. And so if it's purely, say, assistant, so for example, like you just want to have a quick, redraft of a particular type of description or a particular piece of text where you say, hey, I want to change it from the first person to the third person. I wanted to make it slightly shorter, slightly more formal. The bar there's pretty low because you're still there 100% of the time and the changes are very minor. Then you get into co-pilots. Co-pilots are where like it's sort of like working aside you, but you're still there 100% of the time, but it's trying to perform something, like actually perform a task sort of independently just alongside of you. Again, the quality threshold there is still, it's still not, it doesn't need to be like 99%. But the quality thresholds, they are significantly higher because if the performance is say like, hey, 50% right, you're better off, your user's better off just doing it themselves. And so when we think about this is like something as simple as, sampling is something that's pretty common in audit workflows. And so sampling, could be actually, it's agentic for us, but the example here would be like, hey, you have 10,000 rows of a general ledger and you need to sample things according to a specific methodology. And so the specific methodologies can get sort of brittle depending on what you go beyond random sampling. And so, we have a copilot experience that says, okay, this is how we interpret it. This is the sampling. Come back, like the results are returned. Is this the what we call it? Like does that work for you? If not, then let's let's edit it in some way.
Yeah.
And then you get into agentic technologies, sort of agentic AI, in which you want things to be pretty high. But going back to sort of your actual question here, uh, good enough here for us. One of the ironclad rules we have is nothing gets entered into a system of record without human review. So at the end of the day, everything sort of goes through a person. We just want the person to go more and more towards the beginning, more towards the end of the process.
Interesting. Now, you're navigating this regulatory landscape that's different in every country,
Mhm,
every state, and it seems to be changing faster than any compliance team can track it. How
mhm.
do you build an AI that's staying current with that moving target?
Um, that's a good question. So I think that like like the principle here is that everything's in the control of a human and human judgment. And so how do we keep up to speed with everything? We follow everything around the world. We follow the regulations. Try to stay on top of it. Nothing comes into effect immediately, but whether it's regulations, whether it's new threat vectors you know that emerge, or new industry standards in terms of how something's tested, uh, we have to stay very, very, very adaptable. And so, like, where the world was, say, a few years ago, where standards would change every 5, 10, 20 years, now, even if they haven't fully changed, we have to stay on top of it and work with our users, work with our customers, and our partners to understand that, like, highly evolving landscape. But the bottom line here is you have to move really fast, and you have to sort of track everything that you do. And so, like, so the two parts of the question is, for our users, we follow the activity around the world. In our development, we don't take shortcuts just because it's AI in order to enable AI. We log everything in the back end. In our development process, so you think about like how we curate, generate, collect, curate our data sets, how we train our models, how we tune our agents, all that's tracked, sort of in anticipation for whether we're working with customers and they want some transparency, or with potentially upcoming standards and regulations. So we have a pretty good sense of what we do and can adapt to that as the regulators or as the standards settle down.
Well, and it's as you mentioned earlier, it's all about trust. And what I found remarkable is I think you guys quoted 80% of your AI customers are kind of accepting generative content
Mhm,
into their systems.
mhm,
Even with human in the loop, that's kind of the catch, it's kind of the catch for the AI.
mhm.
How did you build enough trust, kind of in the system to kind of get to that 80% level?
I think it comes down to quality for the type of task. And so we do a handful of different things. So, we're not an AI native company. And so, we're trusted by, we're trusted by almost 3,000 customers at this point around the world. We have half the Fortune 500. And so we've built up really sort of strong and strong customer base of very large, very complicated enterprises, and we have the security in the processes for them to trust us. And so, when we were very intentional about when we were building AI, we were very intentional about number one, we want to introduce it sort of slowly and intentionally in the places where they do work. And so what I was describing as assistive, copilot, and agentic workflows, we wanted to make sure that, say, the stats you were mentioning now, it's like uh, 80% of our customers accept AI recommended content into the system of record. If it's sort of really lightweight, like, light redraft, we put that and we make that seamless, baked into their existing processes. If it's more complicated, we put more mechanisms for them to upload context, upload more things to make sure that things are right. But at the end of the day, it's still within their control and still should be natural to their workflows. And then finally, it's quality. Quality is everything, right? Like, even just a quick glance if something looks wrong, at least for our customer base and our user base, they're going to reject it and stop using it. And
Yeah.
so it's just quality.
So you guys are deploying this in production for some, ginormous corporations. They're not demos, but these are real audit teams, they're real companies. What happened when you did that you didn't expect?
I think that the number one thing I did not expect here, so I've been working machine learning for quite some time. The adoption curve is slow. The thing I actually haven't expected, I did not expect, is I couldn't predict that So typically, historically, the most regulated, the biggest companies have been the slowest. It's actually not what we're seeing. We're seeing that some of the largest, most historically or reputationally conservative companies are actually the most aggressive. Now that could be that audit teams, when it comes to frontier technology adoption, they go according to or wherever their company, the top level, drags them or pulls them. Which is actually another way of saying, actually, when I think about it now, that, going back to the question around human creativity, is that if you unleash your people, what you get is this flurry of adoption, this flurry of figuring things out, and audit teams are as aggressive or potentially even more aggressive than any other user base I've ever worked with. So like that's probably the most surprising.
Well, it is, I would say that it's very surprising because those big brands are usually very slow to move, and they
Mhm,
usually watch somebody move before they
mhm,
moved.
mhm,
I worked in big cable, and it was like that, right? One cable company would do something and the others would,
mhm,
watch it for a while to make sure that that was the right decision. And so but what you said is, I think, dead on. I think what people have been doing is, and especially a lot of boards are
mhm.
now saying, you've got to do AI.
Yeah.
You've got to do it in a big way. We're going to fund the money. We're going to give you a chief AI officer or convert your CTO or whatever.
Mhm,
And so the pressure's really on those guys to go figure it out. And I
mhm,
think it almost comes down to a numbers game too, of they have the budget, they have the authority, and they
mhm.
go do it. Where I think a lot of the smaller enterprises and small businesses are saying, how can I still do this? And what can I do? Where these guys are just, they've got the budget to go do it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, internal enablement is pretty significant. And every function within, say, like within our sales processes, like security is now on board. Their AI security review is pretty substantial. It's very real. And same thing with the enablement of, like, we get tons of requests and, like, how do we integrate into sort of like the AI ecosystem, so like Microsoft 365 Copilot and others, in order to, like, maybe this is sort of, call it a prediction here, is like, the surprising thing that probably didn't expect 3 years ago was, I actually think the notion of the web app is going to soften dramatically. And so, like, the web app UI that we see in, like Optro or sort of competitors or enterprise software broadly, is actually naturally going to extend, where agents begin working with each other. And so vendors like Optro will actually have to work inside a Codex, with co-work, whatever that means, definitely within Copilot, Copilot Studio. And because how all of that works together is probably going to be the most interesting, probably, question in enterprise software in the coming decade.
Yeah, because then AIs are talking to AIs
Mhm,
and work's being done that you programmed, but you
mhm,
kind of got to go check. And
mhm.
it really is going to be an amazing time. I think you're right. I think that's the next kind of
Yeah.
frontier, is that AI to AI model. When you're launching one of these deployments, how do you measure whether the AI is actually helping, not just the customers are using it, but it's that, it's making those risk decisions better?
I think that's too early to say whether it's for saying making risk decisions better, because decisions are ultimately human. And a lot of times the long tail of risk is what you really face in reality. Um, it's another way of saying that, like, when you have, like, when stuff, when you buy, if you have a roof that's working and you don't have water in your house, you don't, how well do you know that it's working versus, like, it hasn't, it's the rain there wasn't that much rain that year. Um, so I think we'll see. I think it's early in terms of whether decisions are better yet. But what we are seeing is that a lot more activity is made possible by AI. So that's from an efficiency and a capacity perspective. And so people, user satisfaction's up, and, factors like that. People are able to sort of perform more risk assessments, comply with more, IT compliance standards, But whether risk assessment is sort of like risk management is better, I think it's a little too early because um, it has to diffuse to that point, which we're not sure that it has entirely yet because change has to, the organizations have to change to mitigate those risks.
Yeah. Now you've written a lot about kind of publicly about the AI principles. We talked about some of them here. What are the non-negotiables? What are those lines you don't cross and how do you deploy AI?
Uh, well, lines we don't cross are we don't train on customer data. Like our customers trust us with protecting, like protecting their data. And so we view that as sacrosanct. Uh, Human fully in control is another line we do not cross. Uh, and like those are the two big lines. Everything else sort of flows from there, whether it's like quality and relevance, whether it's, whether it's like, you know, actually, no, that's it. Like protecting their data and that the user is fully in control.
Well, and that's very interesting because I think you guys are doing something pretty remarkable, which is now you're building AI governance capabilities that help organizations actually is a fascinating recursive problem, right? You got AI to govern AI. How do you think about that responsibility?
I think the responsibility is that like there are two sides that every organization has to deal with. Was one is the adoption of AI simply because it's a new transformative technology, but also that like the organization has to make sure that the use of that AI aligns with their security posture and ultimately it's for the goals and their values. And the remarkable thing with AI governance is that so everyone needs the software in some ways. You may be a chief legal officer, if you're a GC, you may be head of compliance, head of audit, head of security, maybe a CISO. And everyone sort of like has that demand, they have that need for it. And it's so early in the game that we don't know sort of who will be sort of the primary coordinator or buyer of AI governance or ultimately responsible. If I were to make a bet, I would actually bet that AI governance goes the way of CISOs. And so if you remember, I guess almost a decade ago at this point, when GDPR was passed and came into effect, it was sort of the ultimate elevation of the CISO because data security, data privacy took a central role in an increasingly digital world. My bet is we're going to see the same thing with AI. That CISO, whoever ends up being ultimately the chief AI or AI governance officer, will have that same responsibility as a CISO because it is so central to everything that we do, where every single function, whether they want to or don't want to realize or don't realize it, they'll be using AI for everything that they do. And understanding that how you use AI aligns with your responsibilities, your fiduciary responsibilities, the risk posture of your company, and protecting those interests, the company's interests, the stakeholders' interests, is as or more important than the CISO's responsibility.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it will end up in that CISO perspective. This is,
Yeah.
it is a security issue after all.
Mhm.
I know that you guys did
Uh,
a lot of
I wanna,
research.
hey, I wanna interject there. It's not just a security. Sort of in the say, it's not just security, but it is sort of alignment with goals. And so, if you read through the EU AI Act, it's about security, but it's secure in a very specific lens that people, again, it's people that's at the company, outside the company, interests, especially sort of human rights, privacy rights, are honored. And then when you get into like the purely sort of outside the regulatory framework, that's where the security aspects come into play. So it's not just security, and that's why this is so important because this will change. This is changing the world, and so it's security and sort of the rights of people, the people that are affected.
Yeah. Now, as we've talked about, most companies are deploying AI somehow these days. And I think a lot of your own research shows that almost no company has really good visibility into how it's being used internally. And I talked to other
Mhm,
companies
mhm,
and they say that too. They were surprised by the fact that, there are 13 different, tools being used by, their organization, and they had
mhm.
no idea all this was going on. From a risk perspective, what's actually at stake when that happens?
I it's shadow AI, just like, shadow IT, from a decade ago. And so what's at stake? It's everything that we talked about. It's, appropriate usage, leakage of company data. Uh, and so and the only way to solve for this is to aggressively enable. The tool is so powerful, and so powerful, so relevant to people's jobs, and what they do on a daily basis that if you don't enable it, people will find a way. They'll sort of have their own separate laptop where they copy and paste. If you think about the security risk when you're copying and pasting random things into your own personal chat GPT, where you don't have control. Well, you have control, but you may forget about the appropriate privacy settings. Uh, and so, the risk vector is, the risk vector is massive, and this only solution, aside from uh, trying to lock down where you can, is to aggressively enable.
Yeah, I agree with that. I remember the shadow IT really almost started with the Wi-Fi revolution,
Hmm.
back in the 90s. I remember, you wanted Wi-Fi because you wanted to move your laptop around, and then all of a sudden you'd be in the conference room and go, "Oh, there's a conference room,
Hmm.
Wi-Fi," and
Yeah,
IT had no idea about it.
yeah.
So I definitely think you're right, and I do remember, 2 years ago, the company saying you can't use AI
Hmm.
because they were so fearful that,
Yeah.
proprietary code and secrets were going into ChatGPT, getting logged and, out for public
Hmm.
consumption. Yeah, from your perspective, in 5 years, what does the internal audit function look like?
In 5 years, internal audit function is a strategic function. Whereas they spend most of their time today uh, just trying to keep up with the amount of work that the business throws at them, that really they're dealing with a lot of times, last year's problem. And the reason why I say last year is that plans are set in a year, budgets set in a year, but the world is way more dynamic. And so what you want to be able to do is to be more continuous, adaptable with the business. And the only way to do that is automate the work you have to do, but that's bogging you down. So, and then what it becomes then is a more advisory type of function, trying to understand the risk landscape, trying to understand uh, the regulatory landscape. And so the word some of our most forward-looking customers are using is to go from risk mitigation to risk management, enabling a business to go into um, a new area when there is risk. And so again, go back a decade, 2 decades, they might say, hey, we don't do that because it's risky. Now it is like, hey, it's risky, but we understand that risk. We're willing to accept it. We're able to manage it. And so that's what an internal audit function is able to do for the business. And so again, from it becomes an advisory function.
Well, and I imagine that's how it was initially envisioned. It was an advisory function, not a task manager. So,
That's right. Yeah.
yeah, I think you're right on. Anton, fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you again for the nomination and congratulations on the award.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.